So this is the last in the series of videos introducing inquiry-based learning for adult learners, and in this one let's have a look at the inquiry design canvas with an example. Now nobody likes going through a gigantic spreadsheet, so I'll make this as painless as possible. So I'm going to be describing how to use a canvas in this video. If you need to know what the canvas is per se, that's the previous video, do have a look. Let's start with the essential question. This is what would be called the central conflict in a movie, which is the central tension. What makes it interesting. Think of what you're teaching as a plus and a minus, and what's the plus and what's the minus. And this is in some sense reducing everything you know down to its essence and saying what's the single most important reason why this thing is worth learning. And if you find the reason interesting, go from there. That's a really good way to think about it. This performance, like any other performance, is if you like it, if your energy shows through, then it's likely the people will like it as well. And that's something all good educators have in common. So why do you like this? And for example, in compassionate communication, the central reason this is worth learning for me is that this question of could you in fact have a good relationship in spite of having conflict, or maybe even through conflict, right? Which is pretty counterintuitive. So that's the essential question. And here's an example of the first provocation that I would do for the seminar. And I'm teaching compassionate communication, and the thought process is, well, how do I build credibility for what I'm doing? How do I show rather than tell? And that's the general idea behind all provocations. How can you show rather than tell? Because we do way too much telling. And for me, and the final choice came down to, well, what if I get somebody who really has experienced it to share their experience? And it's in a previous cohort, I can find somebody who did it, actually used it, and so then they would see immediate relevance in everything else I have to teach. Let's pick another example. So here it's about 30 minutes into the session, and I've gone past why you should learn it, I've spoken about emotions, and here I want them to think about asking and difficulty with asking. And so the headline here is, if you don't ask for what you need, others can't help you. And the way I thought about setting up the provocation is through this really funny story where Stefan Sagmeister, the famous designer, talks about how the founder of Ted Chris Anderson eventually got him a free ticket, first class, from his economy ticket when he was traveling back from Japan. And that sets up this notion of, well, it's difficult to ask, but if you don't ask, you don't receive. And then I will use that later when they actually have to try asking. So to summarize, the provocation is really a process of knowing what you want to teach, asking or creating a headline which kind of encapsulates the idea that you want to teach. For example, maybe you want to teach that asking is relevant, so the central thing is asking is hard, and then finding a resource that kind of brings that to the surface by showing rather than telling. And so in this case, it's Stefan Sagmeister talking about how asking made a difference to his life. So that's kind of the first part. And so all you do to close out this part is really think about the questions that you would in fact seed them with if no conversation happened, right? So let's say you did all of this stuff, they really liked it and they were quite blank. And then you can use the seed question that you have in question storming, saying, well, why is it so hard to ask? And spark a discussion. Around that, then you form these wonderings, as we call them, and allow them to post it. We use Mural for that purpose, and have them at the end of the session, collect all the wonderings for each of the provocations, group them, cluster them, affinity mapping essentially, and then assign one group of wonderings or one line of inquiry to one group, and saying, by the end of the week, your goal is to find out everything you can about this topic and present it back in any way you can. You get 5 minutes. So let's look at the blue section, which is where you will spend almost 90% of your time. And fair warning, it's a slow process, so it takes anything between a week to 2 weeks. So give it time. It's organic, it doesn't come up logically, it comes kind of relationally, and here's what I mean. So you might think that a good way to do it is simply to list out all the concepts you want to teach, put them on a timeline, and kind of, get that done, and then go to the next column and the next column and the next column. What I've seen happens instead is that you zigzag across all of the columns. So for example, if you look at creating a connection, which is about the start of the process, you have to first know how to build rapport before you can learn how to do compassionate communication. It came out first as a question, and that seemed like an interesting enough place to start thinking about this line. So after that, when I said, well, how do I build rapport quickly? And then the response pretty quickly was, well, by reflecting emotions and thoughts, paraphrasing. Which then led to a good idea, saying, well, that almost works, but how do I make it interesting? And that led to the idea of the instructor saying, well, there's no fun actually showing paraphrasing when it works. It just seems like nothing at all. It's more fun if you do it wrong. So we call it paraphrasing in Stefan's words, which then gave you most of what you needed. And then the only thing left to do was to tell them, okay, now you try it, work in pairs. And the goal that I was trying to achieve essentially is that what is it like to build rapport quickly, and how reflecting thoughts and feelings can actually lead to, when done with authenticity, can lead to very quick rapport. So like I said, this is bulk of the work. The remaining part of the canvas is really how do you wrap these sessions up into projects, which is fairly easy. And then, when you have less time but you still have to cover a lot of material, how do you make sure you record these things? And then some basics about team teachers. So let's look at each very briefly. The mini projects is basically a way of developing muscle memory. So as soon as you finish one session, one 1 hour session, you should think of simple projects that they can do individually, which lets them develop the major skills that you thought of in this section. If it's coding, give them a program or a small mini program to do, or a demo or something they should work out individually. It can be a presentation, it can be a video, which is typical for social skills. So anything that gets them to do the things that you did with them but by themselves. And the working sessions at the end of your seminar are basically to get them started on that and give them simple rubrics. For example, it can be X number of lines of code, Y number of minutes, 200 words and so on and so forth. And if they need resources, make sure you curate a simple list of resources that are high quality, authentic, that you use yourself, which says, if you're creating a video, go look at this. If you're looking for a code repository, try this, and so on and so forth. Now the learning segment and the quiz is really when you run out of time. If you're doing something that's not coverable just in 2 seminars, which is typically the length we give for social skills, but it takes a whole week, then you consider what you can do in those 2 to 3 hours that you're given. And for the rest of the material, since they'll be working in groups, but just not in sight of you, record it the same way, but instead of delivering it live, you pre-record it the way I'm doing this. And then we have the ability to put in simple quizzes that we can throw in and present it to them. So you have a sense of, well, did they cover this material? The questions asked, did they answer it? So we can kind of get a sense of that. That's the learning segment. Nothing changes. If the preparation is already done, this is simply a question of recording rather than presenting live. And the last part is the idea of a team teach. Again, there's nothing for you to do here. So long as you set up the lines of inquiry in the inquiry session itself, which is the wonderings, and we talk about a framework we call KWL. What do you know, what do you want to know or wonder about, and what have you learned? So long as you do the K and the W up front, which is before you start the session, what do you know about compassionate communication? Then do the provocations, have them question and saying, what are you wondering about as I do this, and collect all of those. At the end, when they come back and demonstrate as a team what they have learned, have everybody else fill up the L part on the mural, which is what have we learned from the collective teachers. And that becomes a map of what everybody's learnings are, like real live learning rather than some conceptual learning, whatever stands out for them. And also it talks about interest-led learning, which is a really big deal for us. And this becomes a nice map when you show it later, saying, look, this is the questions you started with, this is what you're wondering about, this is what you've learned. For better or for worse, this is where you are. And so it becomes an inventory in some sense of your learning. So that's basically it. This is the whole canvas from top to bottom. And as you can see, as you go through the details, it's kind of centered in the middle. but really start on the left. And as before, give it time. It's a slow process. Feel free to check in with me if you have any questions. And I think one of the things we'll learn in the next cycle is that this is best done in pairs. Like in schools and colleges when we taught them how to redesign their courses, this intensity of work is only fun if you do it in pairs. So I hope you find a partner. If not, reach out to me. All the best.